The land was baked red and fractured. A map of thirst. Kahoni lay flat on an outcrop overlooking Silver Basin, the stone still warm from a sun that had shown no mercy. He was a man made of these shadows and this heat. His black hair, unbound, blended with the cracks in the rock. Below, the cluster of wooden buildings looked like chips of dried wood scattered in a dry wash. This was the white man's foothold, a place that bled the earth. His people, the ND, called the nearby canyon Vuk Mat Chim, Chimney Eye Canyon. It held the last of the sacred water. The spring was the heart of his people, and the heart was growing weak. The veins of the earth, the small creeks that fed the high desert, had shriveled. The deer and the antelope were scarce. Their bones left gleaming white among the saguaro. Kahoni's name meant distant thunder. It was a promise of rain that had not come. He was quiet, a man who had seen too many promises broken by the changing frontier. He lived between the duty to protect the old ways and the violent reality that the old ways were being buried under mine tailings and iron rails. His stomach was a tight knot of hunger and patience. He had been watching this town for 3 days. The elders had sent him. Barrett Sloan, the man who owned the freight wagons and the new silver mine clawing into the mountains, wanted the water. He planned to choke the spring, to divert its lifeblood to his machines. The ND would be left with dust. But there was a rumor, a story carried on the wind, a map, a piece of paper drawn by a white man who had known the land before the sickness of silver. A map showing a hidden branch of the spring, a pulse deep underground that Sloan did not know existed. Kahoni's mission was to find the one who held this map, find them before Sloan's men did. His gaze settled on the largest building, the 2-story inn with the faded sign, The Last Lantern. That was where the rumor had led him. Evelyn Hart, whom everyone called Evie, wiped the last glass clean. It was a pointless gesture. The dust of Silver Basin, a fine red powder, would settle on it again within the hour. At 22, her hands were already rough, her knuckles scraped. She was the daughter of the innkeeper, but with her father gone, she was the innkeeper, the bookkeeper, the cleaner, and, when needed, the protection. Her Colt revolver lay on the bar, the metal gleaming softly in the afternoon light. She was good with it. She had to be. She was an amateur, self-taught from shooting cans and jackrabbits. But her hand was steady. Her father had left her with 2 things this failing inn and a mountain of debt. She was trying to climb out from under both. She dreamed of a small piece of land, not a mine, not a sprawling ranch, just a few acres by a creek that ran all year, a place where she could grow a garden and breathe air that was not thick with regret, a place where she was free. But freedom cost money, and money was as scarce as mercy in Arizona territory. The Last Lantern was quiet. Most of the town was over at the saloon or working at Sloan's freight yard. Evie looked through the fly-specked window. The street was a river of dust. Across the way, Sheriff Pike's office baked in the sun, its iron bar windows like empty eye sockets. Wanted posters fluttered on the wall, the faces blurred by wind and grit. From the saloon, 2 doors down, came the thin, lonely sound of a harmonica. It was the only music the town seemed to know, a sad, repetitive tune that matched the landscape. The town itself was a scar. It lived because of Sloan's mine, and it was dying for the same reason. His massive freight wagons, pulled by 16 mule teams, were a constant presence, grinding the road to powder, carrying silver out and machinery in. They were the iron arteries of Barrett Sloan's ambition. Evie knew Sloan held the paper on half the businesses in town, including hers. He worked closely with Sheriff Pike, a man whose badge seemed pinned to Sloan's wallet rather than his own chest. They were 2 arms of the same greedy body, squeezing Silver Basin dry. And now they wanted the water from Chimney Eye Canyon. Evie had heard the talk. Sloan claimed the spring was on public land, that his mine needed it. The NDE, the Apache who had lived here forever, were being pushed onto a dry reservation miles south, a place of rock and rattlesnakes. The injustice of it sat like a stone in her gut. but she felt powerless. Her own fight was for this small, shadowed room, for the roof over her mother's head. Kahone watched the wagons. He smelled their axle grease and the sweat of the mules. They were a violation. His people had been driven from the fertile valleys, forced onto land the white men deemed worthless. Now, even that worthless land was threatened because it held the one thing the mind could not function without. He shifted, the movement as small and silent as a lizard's. The sun beat on his back, a familiar weight. He tasted the dust, his tongue dry. He thought of the elders, their faces creased with worry, and the hollow sound of the water drum at the last ceremony. His eyes returned to the inn. A woman moved inside. He had seen her before, hanging laundry, her movements quick and certain. She wore trousers, like a man, and carried a gun on her hip. He had seen her handle a sack of feed, lifting it with a strength that surprised him. Now, she stood at the window, staring out. He had been told the map was with the innkeeper's daughter, left by her father, a prospector who had wandered these hills for years, a man who, unlike most, had watched the land instead of just tearing at it. That man was dead, but his secret remained. Kahone wondered if this woman knew what she had. Did she know she held the key to his people's survival, or was it just another piece of paper to her, a memory of a dead father? In the inn, Mayhart, Evie's mother, came out from the kitchen. She was a thin, tired woman, her hands perpetually dusted with flour. She looked at the empty ledger on the bar, then at Evie. "Another freight wagon came in," May said, her voice low. "Mr. Sloane's men, they took the last 2 rooms." Evie nodded, her jaw tightening. They pay late," May corrected softly. "And they drink hard. I do not like the way they look at things." She did not need to say they looked at Evie. "I can handle them, Mama. I know you can." May touched her daughter's arm. "But you should not have to." Evie turned from the window, forcing a small smile. "It is just until we pay off the loan. Then we will find that little plot of land." May's smile in return was watery. She did not believe in that plot of land anymore. She just believed in her daughter. She went back into the kitchen, her shoulders slumped. Evie's gaze fell on the old leather valise sitting behind the bar. It had been her father's. It was scarred and battered, the leather dark with age. Inside were his prospecting tools, a few worthless rocks, a change of clothes, and his journals. It was all that was left. She kept it close, a reminder of his dreams and his failures. She had looked through the journals, full of strange drawings of rocks and rambling thoughts. She had never understood them. She did not know that one of those strange drawings, tucked away, forgotten, was not a drawing of rocks. She did not know it was a map, sketched on brittle paper, showing a line of life hidden beneath a stone. The key. One of Sloane's men pushed through the doors, his spurs ringing on the wooden floor. He was big, smelling of whiskey and sweat. "Girl," he grunted, slamming a coin on the bar. "Whiskey." Evie's eyes went cold. She slid the glass and the bottle down the bar, keeping her hand near her Colt. "Help yourself, and you will call me Miss Hart." The man grinned, showing broken teeth. He poured a drink and leaned against the bar, his eyes traveling over her. "Feisty. Sloane likes feisty. I do not care what Mr. Sloane likes." "You should," the man said, his grin fading. "He owns this town, and he is about to own that canyon up there, too. Gonna be a lot of thirsty Indians." He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Evie said nothing. She just watched his hand, watched his eyes. After a moment, he grunted again, downed his whiskey, and stalked out, his spurs still ringing. She let out a breath she had been holding. The air felt thick, poisoned. As twilight fell, the heat finally began to break, leaking out of the ground. The sky turned a deep, bruised purple. Kahone slipped from the rocks, moving with the shadows. He crossed the open ground without a sound, his moccasins leaving no more print than the wind. He found a place in the deep alleyway between the inn and the general store. a spot thick with darkness. From here, he could see the back door of the inn and the window of the room where the woman, Evie, slept. He had seen her light the lamp there last night. He was a warrior, but this was not a fight of arrows or rifles. Not yet. This was a fight of knowledge. He had to know if she had the map, and he had to get it. He settled down to wait. The patience was part of him, as much as his bones. Inside, Evie bolted the front door. The sound was loud in the silence. The harmonica man had finally stopped playing. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the door, closing her eyes for just a second. She was so tired. Tired of the debt. Tired of Sloane's men. Tired of the dust. She thought of her father's valise. Tomorrow, she would go through it again. Maybe there was something she had missed, something of value she could sell. She turned and picked up the lamp, the small flame casting her long shadow against the wall. She walked up the stairs to her room, the floorboards creaking under her weight. In the alley, Kahone saw the light appear in the upstairs window. He watched her shadow move against the curtain. He did not know her name. He only knew she was the keeper of the map, and he could not let Barrett Sloane get to her first. The distant thunder was here, quiet and waiting in the dark. The gray light of false dawn was a wash of ash over the world. It was the coldest hour, when the land held its breath. Evelyn Hart woke instantly, her body rigid. There was no sound, but the silence itself was wrong. The air in her room was still, but something had disturbed it. She listened. The old inn creaked, its bones settling, but this was different. A floorboard, downstairs in the bar room, a soft scrape, like a boot sole moving on sanded wood, trying not to be heard. Her heart hammered a fast, hard rhythm against her ribs. Her hand moved under her pillow, her fingers finding the cold, familiar grip of her coat. She pulled it free, the weight of it a comfort. She did not bother with a lamp. Her eyes were accustomed to the dark. She rose from the cot, her bare feet making no sound on the plank floor. She moved to her door and listened again. A faint metallic click, a latch. Someone was touching her father's valise. She kept it behind the bar, tucked under the counter, hidden by a stack of grain sacks. It was all she had of him, and she had told herself for months that the journals inside held some key, some answer to the debts that choked her. Rage, cold and sharp, cut through her fear. She pulled the hammer of the revolver back. The sound was loud in the small room. She did not care. She opened her door and moved to the landing of the stairs. The barroom below was a pit of shadows. She saw him, a dark shape, crouched where the valise was kept. He was pulling it free from the sacks. "Stop that," she said, her voice low and steady. It surprised her with its calm. The shadow lunged upright. He was a man, thin and fast. He held the valise in one hand, and she saw the glint of a knife in his other. He did not speak. He just ran for the front door. She did not think. She aimed at the center of the large, moving shadow, and she pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. It filled the inn, a sound of thunder and sulfur. The man slammed into the front door as if hit by a mule. He made a wet, gasping sound, slid down the wood, and lay still. The valise fell from his grip and landed on the floor with a heavy thud. Silence rushed back in, heavy and ringing. The smell of gunpowder stung her nose. Then, from upstairs, her mother screamed, "Mama!" Evie ran down the steps, her hand still holding the smoking revolver. She did not look at the man. She looked at the valise, safe on the floor. May Hart appeared on the landing, clutching a wool robe to her chest. Her face was white. "Evelyn! Oh, heavens! Evelyn! What did you do?" "I stopped him," Evie said. Her voice was shaking now. He was stealing Papa's things." She nudged the body with her foot. He did not move. He was a stranger, his face covered in a dark beard, his clothes trail-worn and filthy. The inn door was still bolted. He had come in through the kitchen window, prying the simple latch. Noise erupted from the street. Shouts, the sound of heavy boots running on the boardwalk. Someone hammered on the front door. "Open up, Sheriff Pike. Open in the name of the law." Evie's hand trembled. She put the revolver on the bar. She went to the door, her fingers fumbling with the heavy bolt. She slid it back. Sheriff Pike stood there, his belly pushing against his unbuttoned coat. His badge was pinned crooked. He held a lantern high, and behind him stood 2 deputies, their faces sleepy and hostile. Pike shoved past her, his eyes wide. Sweet mother of mercy. He lowered the lantern to the man on the floor. The man's chest was a dark, wet ruin. Pike whistled, a low, impressed sound. "He is dead, Miss Hart, stone dead." "He was stealing," Evie said, her voice flat. "He came through the kitchen. He had a knife." Pike's eyes moved from the body to Evie, standing in her thin cotton nightgown, her hair unbound, the gun on the bar. His gaze then found the valise. "What was he stealing? That—" He pointed. Evie moved to pick it up, to pull it close. But Pike stepped in front of her. His arm blocked her path. "That is evidence," he said. "It is mine," Evie snapped. "It was my father's." "It is evidence in a killing," Pike said, his voice hardening. He was enjoying this. He leaned down and grasped the handle of the valise. "I will be taking it." "You cannot," Evie said, desperation rising. "It is all I have." Pike straightened up, the heavy valise in his hand. He smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "I can, Miss Hart, and I am. You will come down to my office. We need your statement." He looked at the body. "Get him out of here. He told his deputies." "No," May Hart said from the stairs. Her voice was shaking but firm. "You will not take my daughter anywhere. She did what was right. She defended her home." Pike's smile faltered. He looked at May, then back at Evie. He did not like being challenged. "Fine," he said. "I will be back. But this—" He held the valise up. "This stays with me." He turned and walked out, carrying her father's valise. Evie watched him go, a hollow, sick feeling opening in her stomach. She had protected the valise only to lose it. In the alleyway across the street, Kahone had not moved for hours. He had seen the man slip through the kitchen window of the inn. It was not one of the men of Sloan, not one he recognized. It was a scavenger, a drifter drawn by opportunity. Kahone had tensed, ready to move, to stop him. But the man was after the valise, his own mission. Then the shot came, a single, sharp report. He watched from the shadows as the sheriff arrived. He watched the woman, Evie. He saw her face in the lantern light as Pike took the valise. It was a face of white, cold fury. She fought for the bag. She called it her father's. She did not plead that it held a secret. She did not bargain. He studied her. She did not know. The realization settled on him with the weight of a stone. She had no idea she held the map. She was protecting a memory, not a secret. This changed things. The key was no longer with her. It was with the town's lawman, a man who worked for Barrett Sloan. As the sun's first light touched the highest peaks, Kahone slipped away from the town, melting back into the landscape of rock and mesquite. He climbed to his high perch. He needed to think. He needed to watch. As he settled, his gaze scanned the horizon to the east, toward the sacred mountains. A thin line of gray smoke rose against the pale sky. He watched it, his body tensing. It was a message. From Nalin, the elder. The smoke paused. One long, steady plume. Then it broke. 3 fast, small puffs. He read the signal as easily as he read the tracks of a deer. The water sinks. The animals are dying. It was the most urgent message Nalin could send. The spring at Chimney Eye was failing faster than they had feared. The life of his people was evaporating into the hot, cloudless sky. There was no more time. Later that morning, Barrett Sloan appeared at the inn. He did not come through the barroom. which was now clean of its grim evidence. He came to the kitchen door, knocking softly, like a friend. He was a tall man, dressed in a clean suit, his boots polished. He smelled of expensive soap and cigars. He held his hat in his hand. "Miss Hart, Mrs. Hart." He nodded to them both, his face a mask of deep concern. "I was horrified to hear what happened. A terrible ordeal, simply terrible." Evie stood by the stove, her arms crossed. Her eyes were cold. "We are fine, Mr. Sloane," she said. "Of course. You are strong, Miss Hart. I have always admired that." He smiled, and Evie felt a chill. "But," he said, "I understand Sheriff Pike has taken some of your property." Evie said nothing. "Pike can be difficult," Sloane continued, studying his hat. "He is a man who follows the letter of the law, even when compassion is called for." He paused. "Perhaps I could speak with him. Persuade him to return your father's belonging, Gwen." "And why would you do that?" Evie asked. Sloane looked up, his eyes meeting hers. They were pale blue and utterly empty of warmth. "Because I consider you a friend, Evelyn, a neighbor, and I am worried about you, worried about your mother." He turned his attention to May, who was sitting at the table, her hands twisting in her lap. "In fact," he said, his voice softening, "I came here to discuss your future. I know how hard things have been since your husband passed." May's head bowed. Sloane reached into his coat pocket and produced a piece of paper. He unfolded it and laid it on the table. "I was looking through my ledgers," he said, "and I found this, a loan document, for a rather significant sum. Your husband's signature is at the bottom." May stared at it. Evie moved to the table and snatched the paper. She read it. It was a loan for an amount she could not imagine. Dated 2 years prior. She looked at the signature. It looked like her father's, but it was too neat. Her father's hand was a messy scrawl. This was a careful, deliberate forgery. "This is not real," Evie said, her voice shaking with new anger. Sloane raised an eyebrow. "I assure you, it is quite real. The debt is past due. I would hate to have to foreclose. May, to take the inn." May made a small, wounded sound. "What do you want?" Evie whispered, crumpling the paper in her fist. Sloane gently plucked it from her hand, smoothing it out. "I do not want your money. Evelyn, I know you do not have it." He smiled again. "I just want you and your mother to be safe. I will tear this paper up. I will forget the debt completely." "In exchange for what?" Evie demanded. "In exchange for this inn, sell it to me. A fair price, of course. Enough for you and your mother to move on. Go to Prescott, perhaps, or Tucson. This basin is a hard place." Evie stared at him. He wanted her gone. He wanted the inn, which sat at the main crossroads, which saw everyone who came and went. "If I say no," she said, "then the debt stands, and I must take the inn, and," Sloane added, his voice still soft, "I am afraid Sheriff Pike will be much less cooperative. He will likely find that this morning's shooting was not so simple. Perhaps it was murder." The trap was sprung. It was complete. If she lost the inn, she and her mother were homeless. If Pike charged her, she would hang. All she had was the valise, and Pike had that, and Sloane was offering to fix everything for the low price of her home, her land, her entire life. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course." Sloane folded the fake document and put it back in his pocket. He patted May's shoulder. "Do not you worry. May, I will take care of everything." He walked to the door and paused, turning back. "Oh, and Evelyn." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished pin. It was a silver bird. Its wings spread. "One of my men found this near the body this morning. Dropped by the thief, I suppose. Does it look familiar to you?" Evie's blood went cold. It was the same emblem. She had seen one just like it on the hat of Sloane's freight boss, Cruz. Sloane was not asking. He was telling her. The man she shot, the man who broke into her home, was one of his. He had sent him to get the valise. Her gaze dropped from the pin to his face. She finally understood. The valise was not just a memory. It held something he wanted, something he was willing to kill for. He smiled, knowing she understood. He tossed the pin onto the table, where it spun and came to rest. "Think on my offer," he said. He put on his hat and left. Evie looked at the pin, then at her mother, who was weeping silently. She was trapped. She had lost her father's valise. She was about to lose her home, and she might be charged with murder. And for the first time, she asked herself the question that Kahoni already knew the answer to. What was in that valise? The kitchen was silent after Sloane left. The silver bird pin seemed to burn on the rough wooden table. May Hart sat staring at it, her face a pale mask of terror. She looked at Evelyn, her eyes pleading. "Evelyn," she whispered, a dry, cracked sound. "We must give him the inn. He will ruin us. He will tell them that you shot that man in malice." Evelyn's hands curled into fists. "He sent that man, Mama. He sent him to steal Papa's valise. Now he uses it to threaten us." She looked at the fake loan paper Sloane had so politely left. "And this is a lie. It does not matter if it is a lie, if the sheriff says it is true." May wept. "We have nothing." "Yes, we do," Evelyn said, her voice hard. "We have this." She tapped her temple. He showed his hand. "He wants that valise. He wants it more than he wants this inn. The inn is just the leverage." She walked to the kitchen door and looked out into the dusty yard, her mind racing. She could run, saddle her horse, take what little cash was in the till, and ride for Tucson. She could be gone before nightfall. But the thought of her mother, alone, facing Sloane and Pike, turned her stomach to ice. She saw May's frail shoulders, and the image of her own wanted poster nailed to the sheriff's wall. No, running meant they won. Running meant her father's name was worthless, and her mother was left destitute. She would not run. She would fight. She grabbed her shawl. "I'm going to the stable. I need to think." "Do not be long. Evelyn, please." Evelyn walked across the yard, the sun hot on her head. She felt exposed, as if a rifle sight was trained between her shoulders. The stable was dark and cool, smelling of hay and horse. Her mare, a sturdy buckskin, nickered softly as she entered. She leaned her forehead against the horse's warm neck, breathing in the animal scent. She was trapped. She needed the valise. It was the only thing that could explain any of this. But Pike had it, and Sloane controlled Pike. She felt it before she saw it. A prickle on her skin, a change in the air. She was not alone. She spun, her hand dropping to the colt at her hip, pulling it free in one smooth motion. He was standing in the shadows by the feed bin, a place that had been empty a second before. He was an Apache. His black hair was long, held back by a simple leather band. He wore buckskin trousers and a loose cotton shirt. He was still, utterly silent, his dark eyes fixed on her. In his hand, he held a knife, the blade pointing at the floor. She aimed the revolver at his chest. Her hand was rock steady. "Who are you?" she said, her voice low. "Are you one of Sloane's?" He did not move. His gaze was unnerving, calm and assessing. He looked at the gun, then back at her face. "No," he said. His voice was quiet, with a rough edge, like stones rubbing together. "Then get out," she said. "You lost something," he said, ignoring her command. "My patience? Get out before I shoot you." "The valise," he said. "Barrett Sloane has it." Evelyn's breath caught. "How did you know?" He took one small step out of the shadow. He was lean, but his shoulders were broad. He looked like he was part of the dry, hard land itself. "I have been watching. Sloane sent a man to steal it. You stopped him." "You saw that?" "I saw the sheriff take the valise." "Who are you?" she asked again. My name is Kahoni. He tilted his head. You are Evelyn Hart. The fact that he knew her name sent a fresh chill down her spine. She distrusted this. She had grown up with the stories, the warnings, an Indian from the desert. Dangerous, unpredictable. What do you want? Sloane wants the valise because of what is inside. Kahoni said, a map. Your father's map. A map. The word echoed in her head. All those strange drawings in her father's journals. She had been looking for a document, a deed, something with a dollar value. A map to what? She whispered. Water, he said. Our water. The life of my people. Sloane wants to steal it for his mine. Evelyn lowered the gun. Just an inch. His words landed with a simple, heavy weight of truth. It explained everything. Sloane's greed, the forged debt, the murder charge. He has it, she said, the despair returning. Sheriff Pike has it, which means Sloane has it. We get it back, Kahoni said. She stared at him. There is no we. I am a town person. You are. No, he finished. I know what you think. He was suspicious, too. A town woman. You are all friends of Sloane. You all drink the water he steals. I am not his friend, she snapped. He is trying to take my home. He is threatening to hang me for defending it. Then our goals are the same, Kahoni said. You want the valise to save your home. I want the map inside it to save mine. A truce, Evelyn said, testing the word, a temporary one. She holstered her revolver, but kept her hand on the grip. He sheathed his knife, but did not move his hand from the hilt. We get the bag, she said. Then we talk about what is inside. He nodded, agreed. But you follow my lead in that town, she warned. No sudden moves. No? He cut her off, his voice sharp. I know your town. I know the sheriff's office. He stepped past her and peered through a crack in the stable wall, looking toward the jail. Oh. I have been watching. Pike and his deputies are lazy. There are 3 of them. One sleeps in the back room. One walks the town every 2 hours. He stops at the saloon for a drink. He stops at Sloane's freight yard. It takes him 30 minutes. And Pike, he stays in the office until midnight. Then he goes to the saloon. The man who walks the town comes back, checks the doors, and then sits at the desk. He falls asleep in 10 minutes. Every night. You are saying we just walk in? Not the front door, Kahoni pointed. Between the assayer's office and the jail. There is a narrow alley. It is full of barrels and trash. It leads to the back window. The window's latch is broken. Evelyn stared at him, impressed despite her mistrust. He had done his homework. When? She asked. After midnight, when Pike is at the saloon and the deputy is on his walk. As they stood there in the dim light, 2 men walked past the stable doors. Evelyn recognized them instantly. Cruz and Madden, Sloane's most loyal freight bosses. They were hard men, their faces burned by the sun, guns low on their hips. They paused, looking directly at the Hart stable. Cruz, a burly man with a thick beard, pulled a piece of chalk from his pocket. He drew a large, rough X on the stable door. Madden laughed, a low, ugly sound. They did not say a word. They just marked the building and walked on, their spurs ringing. It was a threat, a brand. This property now belongs to Sloane. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Kahoni. His expression was unchanged, but his eyes were like black flint. Tonight, she said, her voice a tight wire. We do it tonight. As evening fell, the town grew louder. Music spilled from the saloon. Evelyn walked past. Keeping to the shadows, she heard Pike's voice, deliberately loud, telling a story to the men at the bar. Cold as ice, that is what she is, Pike boomed. Shot him right in the back as he was trying to run. I am telling you, men, there is more to this than a simple thief. That Hart girl is dangerous. The narrative was being set. She was not a homeowner defending herself. She was a cold killer. The legal trap was closing. She met Kahoni behind the stable as the town clock struck midnight. The moon was a thin sliver, offering little light. Pike's office was dark. "He is gone," Kahoni whispered. He moved from the shadows, and Evelyn had to hurry to keep up. He was not walking. He was flowing, a piece of the darkness. He led her to the alley. It was narrow and smelled of garbage and stale beer. He pointed to the window, high up. He laced his fingers together, offering her a boost. She paused, her hand on his. His skin was warm, his grip strong. She pushed down her distrust and stepped into his hands. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. She balanced on the edge of a rain barrel and fumbled with the window. He was right. The latch was broken. She slid it open and crawled through, dropping silently onto the floor inside. The office smelled of stale tobacco and sweat. She moved to the front, peered through the dirty glass. The street was empty. She unbolted the front door, and Kahoni slipped inside. He pointed to the corner, under Pike's desk. She dropped to her knees. There it was, her father's scarred valise. She grabbed the handle, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst. She expected shouts, a gunshot, but there was only the sound of a man snoring in the back room. They slipped out the front door, closing it softly, and melted back into the alley. They did not stop until they were back in the deep, hay-scented darkness of the stable. Evelyn's hands were shaking so hard she could barely work the buckles. She ripped them open and threw back the lid. The journals were there, the prospecting tools, the change of clothes. She felt along the side, where her father had clumsily stitched a tear in the leather lining years ago. She felt a fresh cut. The lining was loose. She ripped it open, a hidden pocket. It was empty. No. Her breath hitched. No. She turned the valise upside down, shaking it. Nothing, just journals and tools. It is gone, she whispered, the fight draining out of her. He already has it. Sloane won. Kahoni took the valise from her. His large hands were surprisingly gentle. He ran his fingers along the tear, his touch patient, searching. He felt deeper inside the lining, past the pocket. His fingers stopped. He pulled. A small, folded scrap of paper came free. It was not the map. It was a corner, torn from a larger sheet. Evelyn took it from him. In the faint moonlight filtering through the stable door, she unfolded it. It was tiny, barely the size of her palm. There were only a few lines drawn on it, in her father's familiar ink. She saw a symbol, a circle with 3 lines rising from it, like an eye looking up, surrounded by jagged canyon walls. Vuk mat chim, chimney eye. And leading away from it, a single, dotted line, heading northeast into the mountains. Beside it, her father had scribbled 2 words. Red Spire. It was not the map, but it was a clue. Then stop looking at me like that, Kahoni murmured. Evelyn froze. She had not realized she was staring at him, her eyes wide, the small scrap of paper held between them. She looked down, her face hot. He pointed to the paper. This is all we have. It is a start, Evelyn said, her voice finding its strength again. It is our only hope. The scrap of paper felt impossibly small, yet it was the heaviest thing Evelyn Hart had ever held. Red Spire. She knew the place. It was a tall, solitary column of rock to the northeast, a landmark for prospectors, said to be cursed by the Enda. Now she knew why. Kahoni's eyes were fixed on the drawing. His voice was low. We must leave. Now. Leave? Evelyn's mind raced. To where, and what about my mother? She will be safer if you are not there. Sloane has marked your home. He will watch her, but he will not harm her. She is his anchor, to keep you in his reach. When he learns you are gone, he will send all his men after you. We must use the night. He was right. Staying meant capture. It meant losing her mother, the inn, and her life. Fleeing was a desperate gamble, but it was the only one she had. She ran back to the inn's kitchen, her feet silent on the packed earth. Her mother was asleep in her chair, her face exhausted. Evelyn felt a sharp, cutting pain. She wrote a note, her hand flying across the paper. I am safe. Going to find the proof to stop Sloan. I will come back. I love you. She propped it against the cold coffee pot, where May would see it. She grabbed a small sack, stuffing it with a loaf of bread, a canteen of water, and a small tin box that held her mending kit and a few dollars. She met Cajon by the stable. He had her buckskin mare and his own paint pony, lean and tough as wire. We cannot follow the road, he said. We follow the land. He led her out of Silver Basin, not toward the main pass, but up a narrow animal trail that climbed the canyon wall. The town fell away below, a scatter of sleeping squares in the darkness. Cajon moved with an unnerving, fluid silence. Evelyn's mare, unused to the steep, rocky terrain, stumbled, and the sound of a dislodged stone rolling into the dark seemed as loud as a gunshot. Cajon paused, his head cocked, listening to the night. He did not reprimand her. He just waited, a silhouette of patience, before moving on. When the sun rose, it found them in a different world. The basin was gone, replaced by a high, arid plateau of fractured rock and stunted juniper. There was no trail, not one that Evelyn could see. But Cajon followed something. He would stop, crouch, and study the ground. He was not looking for tracks. He was reading the earth itself. He pointed to a faint, greenish tinge in the rock, a vein of copper or oxidized iron that ran through the red stone like a thread. The water speaks, he said. Where this vein runs, the roots of the deep plants can find moisture. We follow it. He taught her to see what he saw, the way the pebbles lay, pushed aside by the memory of a flash flood years ago. The smell of the sagebrush, damper and sharper in certain hollows. He pointed to a line of ants marching into a crack in the rock. They go to drink. The land was a brutal enemy. The sun was a hammer. Hot wind blew all day, a steady, sand-filled gale that chapped her lips and stung her eyes. The air was thin, and by midday, Evelyn's head pounded. This was not the frontier of preachers and homesteads. This was a place that wanted you dead. They skirted a wide, dry wash where a pack of coyotes were tearing at a deer carcass. The animals watched them, yellow-eyed and unafraid, their muzzles dark. By late afternoon, they reached a chasm that split the plateau, Knife Edge Gulch. It was 100 feet deep and only 20 feet across, but the path down was a treacherous, narrow switchback of loose shale. I will lead the horses, Evelyn said, her voice firm. Cajon looked at her, then at the path. No, the pony is sure. Your mare is not. She will panic. We lead them one at a time. I will take yours first. He took the buckskin's reins, speaking to the horse in low, soft chirps. He started down the path. Evelyn watched, her heart in her throat, as the mare's hooves slipped, sending a shower of gravel into the void. But Cajon held her, his hand firm on her bridle, his own feet planted as if grown from the rock. When he reached the bottom, he waved. It was her turn. She started down, her boots slipping. Halfway, a gust of wind slammed into the canyon wall, and she lost her footing. She slid, grabbing for a handhold, her fingers finding only crumbling stone. She would have fallen, but his hand shot out and clamped around her wrist. He had climbed halfway back up for her. He did not say a word. He just held her, his grip like a steel trap, until she found her feet. She leaned against the rock wall, her whole body trembling. His hand was still on her arm. She could feel the heat of him, solid and real. She looked at his face, inches from hers. Thank you, she breathed. He just nodded. His eyes were not cold. She realized. They were just still. He released her and continued down. She followed, her steps more certain. He had trusted her with his life by turning his back, and she had trusted him with hers by taking his hand. They made camp that night in the shelter of a rock overhang. They ate a spare meal of dry bread and jerky Cajon carried. The silence between them was different now. It was not empty, it was shared. The next day, they saw the way station. It was a single, squat adobe building by a muddy waterhole, marked by a lonely telegraph pole. A sign read, Alma's Post, Supplies and Mail. A woman was splitting wood out front. She was stout, her face weathered to leather, her gray hair in a tight bun. She stopped, the axe resting on her shoulder. As they rode up, "Alma," Evelyn said, sliding from the saddle. "It is Evelyn Hart." Widow Alma squinted. "By God, child." "I heard you shot a man." She looked at Kahone, her eyes sharp and assessing, and took up with the Apache. "Pike has got a warrant out for you. Murder and consorting with hostiles." "He is not hostile," Evelyn said, her voice sharp. "He is helping me. We are running from Sloan." Alma spat on the ground. "Sloan, that silver-plated sidewinder. He is the only hostile in this territory." Her gaze softened. "Get inside, both of you. My rifle sees farther than Pike's warrant." Inside, the station was dark and cluttered, smelling of coffee and leather. Alma poured them tin cups of water. It was bitter with alkali, but it was wet. "What is Sloan doing?" Evelyn asked. "He is moving," Alma said, sitting heavily on a stool. "His wagons have been rolling past here for 2 days, heading for Chimney Eye." "Wagons?" "Big ones, freighters, and they are carrying something new. I saw it, a steam engine, a big one, and pipes, lots of black iron pipe." "A pump," Evelyn whispered, the blood draining from her face. "He is going to pump the spring dry. He is not waiting for a map," Alma said grimly. "He is just going to take the source. Right now." "But he does not know about the hidden branch," Evelyn said, clutching the thought. Alma shook her head. "Does not matter, child. If he drains the heart, the branches die too." Evelyn's hope faltered. "Alma, who sent that man to my inn? The one I—" Alma's face darkened. "Sloan's men, Cruz and Madden. They were here, bragging. Said Sloan wanted some old papers of your father's. They hired a drifter to do the snatching. A simple job, they said." Evelyn's stomach twisted. "They are hunting you," Alma continued, her voice low. "And they are not the only ones. Sloan has got eyes everywhere." "What do you mean?" "Be careful who you trust back in town, even the educated ones. That new doctor, the one with the clean hands and the fancy Eastern diploma, Dr. Finch, he spends a lot of time at Sloan's office, more time than a physician should. They say he is investing in the mine." Dr. Finch. He had treated her father. He had been kind to her mother. The betrayal was a new, cold sickness. The net was tighter than she had ever known. Alma gave them fresh water and a sack of dried apples. "You are heading for Red Spire," she said. It was not a question. "How did you know?" "Only one reason to go northeast into that godforsaken rock pile. Your father used to talk about it, said the Hawks knew a secret there. Godspeed, child." "And you," she said, nodding to Kahone. "Keep her alive." He only nodded. They rode out, the urgency a physical spur. They traveled until dark, pushing the horses. That night, they did not ride to a camp. Kahone led her into a shallow canyon, a place where the rocks themselves seemed to hum. He stopped, dismounting. "We are here." "Here?" It was a sacred place. A circle of low, smooth black stones marked a patch of ground. In the center, a fissure in the rock was dark with moisture. "Leave your gun," Kahone said. Evelyn's hand went to her Colt. You cannot bring it inside the circle. This is a place of water, not of weapons." She looked at him, at the absolute certainty in his face. This was his world, his law. She slowly unbuckled her gun belt and hung it on her saddle horn. She felt naked, vulnerable. She walked into the circle. Figures emerged from the shadows, old men and a few women, their faces maps of grief and patience. They were Inde. At their center sat a man so old he seemed part of the stone. Nalin. His eyes were closed, but he turned his head as if he had seen them. Kahone spoke to him in their language, his voice soft. He held out the scrap of paper. Nalen's gnarled fingers traced the drawing. His eyes opened. They were cloudy, but they saw. He spoke, his voice like sand and wind. He confirms it. Kahoni translated, his voice tight. The map is true. The water forks at the red spire. But he adds what your father learned from us. The entrance to the underground stream is hidden. It is a vent in the rock. It can only be found at sunset, when the red-tailed hawks circle over it, riding the warm air that rises from the water's breath. A new key, a new hope, as if summoned by the word. A sound split the twilight, a sharp crack and the whine of a bullet ricocheting off the canyon wall, spitting stone chips. Evelyn screamed. Kahoni grabbed her, throwing her to the ground behind the stone circle. Another shot, then another. They were being fired on from the ridge above. Cruz, Madden, Evelyn hissed the names. Get the horses, run, Kahoni said, pulling his knife. He looked at Nalin. The old man had not moved. He was chanting softly. The horses, they were tethered 50 yards away. Exposed. Evelyn scrambled on her hands and knees, keeping the rocks between her and the ridge. Kahoni moved in the other direction, a shadow flanking their attackers, trying to draw their fire. A bullet kicked up dust by Evelyn's hand. She lunged, grabbing the reins of her mare and the pony. The horses were panicked, rearing and pulling. Cajon! She yelled, trying to drag them back toward the sacred circle. He was running, zigzagging between the boulders. A rifle flashed on the ridge. Kahoni cried out, a sharp intake of breath, and stumbled. He pressed himself against a rock face, his hand gripping his shoulder. He was hit. Evelyn's fear vanished, replaced by a cold, clear rage. She tied the horse's reins to a solid juniper root and ran to him, staying low. Are you hurt? It is nothing, he grated, his face pale in the dusk. She saw the dark stain spreading on his shirt, high on his left shoulder. It is not nothing. The shooting stopped. The ambushers were likely moving, trying to get a better angle in the fading light. Evelyn pulled him deeper into a cleft in the rock. Sit! She tore open her sack and pulled out the small tin box. She had her needle. She had thread, but the outline's words echoed in her mind. She looked around, desperate. At the base of the rock, a stalk of dried wild corn grew, a remnant of some offering. Its silks were brown and dry, but tough as fiber. Stay still, she commanded. She ripped his shirt open, exposing the wound. It was a nasty graze. A deep furrow plowed through the muscle, bleeding freely. She took her canteen and washed it. Ignoring his sharp hiss of pain, she grabbed the corn silk, twisting the tough, dry fibers between her fingers, pulling them into a crude, strong thread. She threaded her needle. What are you doing? He asked, his eyes watching her. My grandmother taught me this. She said corn silk is clean. She said it holds the skin. She did not know if it was true, but it was all she had. She put the needle to his skin. He did not flinch. He just watched her face, his gaze intense. Her hands did not shake. She made 3 quick, tight stitches, pulling the skin together. The bleeding slowed. It was rough work, but it was strong. She packed the remaining silk over the top and bound it with a strip of cloth torn from her own petticoat. Her fingers were bloody. Their faces were inches apart. The small, intimate act had shattered the remaining wall between them. The ice was broken, washed away in blood and water and shared danger. You move well in the dark, he said, his voice quiet. You taught me to see, she whispered. The rifles were quiet. Cruz and Madden had pulled back, wary of the night and the man they were hunting. We cannot stay, Kahoni said, pushing himself to his feet. They took the horses and, under the cover of the new moon, began the final, desperate ride toward the red spire. They rode through the remainder of the night, and the land grew teeth. The trail Kahoni followed was one of memory, a path that existed only in his mind, and it led them upward, into a maze of shattered rock and sheer-sided mesas. Kahoni rode slumped, his body rigid with the effort of staying upright. The crude stitching Evelyn had done was holding, but the wound was deep, and she could see the feverish glint in his eyes when the sliver of moon caught them. She was no longer following a stranger. She was following a man she had pulled from a crossfire, a man whose blood was on her hands. The barrier between them, the one of racial suspicion and mutual distrust, had been torn open, and she had sutured it with corn silk. Red Spire appeared at dawn, a colossal monument of blood-red stone, a solitary finger pointing at a pale, indifferent sky. It stood on the edge of a high, desolate plateau. As they approached its base, the wind, which had been a constant, weary sigh, died. The air became heavy, still, and suffocating. The sky, which had been clear, was now a bruised, yellowish gray. "A storm," Kahoni said, his voice a dry rasp. "A bad one. We need shelter." He led them not to a proper cave, but to a deep overhang. A concave scoop in the side of a smaller butte that faced away from the coming wind. It was barely a hollow, but it was cover. They got the horses settled in the deepest part, their rumps to the wall. Evelyn pulled the saddles and meager bedrolls. The first drop of rain was not a drop at all. It was as if the sky simply tore open. A cold, violent deluge slammed into the desert, turning the dust to instant, streaming mud. The temperature plummeted. Within minutes, they were soaked to the bone, their clothes a second, icy skin. Evelyn looked at Kahoni. He was shivering, his teeth chattering, his face pale under his dark skin. The fever from the wound, mixed with the cold, was dangerous. "We need a fire," she said, her voice firm. He shook his head, his eyes closed. "No, the smoke, cruise and madden." "We'll be hiding, just like us," she snapped. "They will not see a small flame in this. You will die of lung fever before they find us." She rummaged in her saddlebag, her fingers numb. She found the small tin box. Inside, wrapped in an oilcloth, were 3 precious matches. She found a cluster of dry weeds and twigs pushed deep into a crack in the rock by some pack rat. She piled them, adding larger sticks from a dead juniper branch. She struck the first match. The wind howled, a hungry animal, and snatched the flame. She struck the second. She cupped it with her body, shielding it, feeding it to the tinder. A tiny, struggling flame caught, smoked, and then died as the damp wood hissed. 1 match left. Kahoni was watching her, his body racked with tremors. He pushed himself forward. "Give it to me." He took the match. He did not strike it. He took a piece of his own dry buckskin shirt, fraying the edge with his knife. He placed the match head against the tinder, then struck a piece of flint against his knife blade. The spark was tiny, but it caught the match head. A burst of sulphurous light, and the tinder caught. He blew on it, a low, steady breath, ignoring the rain and wind, protecting the small ember with his hands until it finally grew into a small, steady flame. Evelyn watched, silent. He had created fire where she had failed. The small blaze was a miracle. It pushed back the cold, painting their small hollow with flickering, orange light. The smell of wet earth and juniper smoke filled the air. Evelyn hung their wet coats on nearby rocks, the wool steaming. She took her water tin, filled it with rainwater from a puddle, and set it by the fire to heat. She tore off another strip of her petticoat and soaked it in the hot water. She knelt beside him. "Let me see the wound." He did not protest. He leaned back against the rock as she untied the bandage. The corn silk stitches were angry and red, but they were holding. The skin was hot to the touch. She gently cleaned it with the hot cloth. He hissed, but his eyes never left her face. The firelight played over his features, softening the hard lines, illuminating the exhaustion. He was watching her, not as a white woman, not as an ally, but as a man watches a woman. The intensity of it was a physical thing, a pressure on her skin. She could feel his breath. She finished cleaning the wound, but her hands lingered, resting on his shoulder. She looked up, and her own breath caught. His gaze held hers. There was no defense in it, no suspicion. There was only a deep, quiet understanding, a raw, shared truth. He had seen her kill. She had seen him wounded. They had saved each other. He lifted his good hand, slowly, as if it were immensely heavy. He reached for her, not for her body, but for her face. His fingers were rough, calloused, but they hovered, trembling slightly, an inch from her cheek, afraid to bridge the last, unspoken gap. The safe distance between them had shrunk to nothing. "You ain't supposed to touch me," she whispered. The words were not a command. They were a question, a reminder of the worlds that separated them, of the unwritten laws of truce that had governed them. His hand stopped, his fingertips brushing the air near her skin. His eyes searched hers, and his voice was a low murmur, barely louder than the rain. "Then stop looking at me like that." The moment stretched, taut and fragile. He had not touched her, but she felt branded. She saw the cost of their journey in his face, the pain, the resolve. He had seen the same in hers. He let his hand fall, breaking the spell. He turned his head and looked into the fire. The shared space was charged. A new understanding settled between them that had nothing to do with maps or enemies. He reached for the small leather pouch on his belt. He took out a thin strip of rawhide, dyed red with ochre. He laid it carefully on the ground between his bedroll and hers. It was a line, a physical boundary, a mark of respect. Evelyn looked at it. She understood. It was his way of restoring the border she had just acknowledged, a way to keep them safe from a complication neither of them could afford. She nodded, her throat tight. They sat in silence for a long time, the rain lashing down outside, the fire crackling between them. Eventually, his breathing deepened. The heat and the strain had exhausted him, and he slipped into a restless, feverish sleep. Evelyn watched him. She looked at the red leather strip. It was a barrier, a reminder of his world and hers. But the fire was a shared thing. Quietly, so as not to wake him, she reached out. She did not pick the talisman up to move it aside. She simply slid it, moving it from the empty space between them to a spot closer to the fire, where the light and warmth touched it. It was no longer a division. It was part of their camp. The storm broke before dawn. The world was washed clean, the air so clear it felt sharp in the lungs. Kahoni awoke, his fever lessened. He looked at the leather strip by the fire, then at her. He said nothing. They moved to the base of the massive red spire as the sun cleared the eastern mountains. The rock glowed. "Now we watch," Kahoni said. He pointed to the sky. The red-tailed hawks. They were there, 2 of them, circling high above. They rode the warming air. But as the sun climbed, the hawks' flight path changed. They shifted, concentrating on one area, a spot 200 yards up the base of the spire. They were not just circling. They were hovering, their wings fluttering, holding their place on a column of air that was invisible to the eye. "The breath," Kahoni whispered, his voice alive with sudden energy. They scrambled over the slick, wet rocks toward the spot, and they saw it. It was a miracle. Against the sheer red face of the cliff, almost hidden in a deep fissure, was a patch of vibrant, impossible green, a tangle of ferns, thick moss, and delicate yellow flowers. Thriving in the arid wasteland, water beaded on the leaves. From a crack in the rock, no wider than a man's arm, a plume of cool, damp air rose, the vent, the breathing hole of the underground stream. Evelyn dropped to her knees, plunging her hands into the moss. It was real. They had found it. But as she looked up, her joy turned to ash. Driven into the earth, not 10 feet from the fissure, was a wooden stake. It was painted with a black S, Barrett Sloane's mark. Another stake was 20 feet away, and another, a neat line, marking a boundary. "He knows," she whispered. "He already knows." Before Kahoni could answer, they heard it, the rumble of wheels, the crack of a whip, and the cursing of men. On a crude track below them, a single heavy freight wagon, pulled by a struggling four-mule team, was making its way toward the spire. They dropped flat, hiding behind the boulders. A supply wagon, Kahoni observed. Tools, ropes. "Not the pump," Evelyn said. "Not yet, but it is coming." "We have to slow them down. We have to buy time for Nalin. For your people." Kahoni nodded, his eyes hard. He checked his knife. Evelyn checked her Colt. They waited until full dark. The two teamsters had made camp by their wagon, their small fire a defiant spark in the vast darkness. They were loud, confident, drinking whiskey. Evelyn and Kahoni moved in from opposite sides. Ghosts in the night. It was over in seconds. No shots were fired. Kahoni's knife at one man's throat and Evelyn's gun barrel at the other's temple were enough. They tied the men securely, using their own ropes. "We cannot just leave the wagon," Evelyn said, looking at the cargo. It was loaded with barrels of tools, thick ropes, and massive, folded sheets of heavy, oiled canvas, tarpaulins, likely to build shelters for the pump crew. "We need to stop them," she said. Kahoni nodded. He pulled a torch from their camp supplies. He lit it. The flame burst to life with a loud whoosh. Kahoni stumbled back, dropping the torch as if it were a snake. He fell against the wagon wheel, his breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. His eyes were wide, staring at the flame, but he was not seeing it. He was seeing something else. A burning lodge, the smell of scorched buckskin and death. The memory Alma had hinted at, the trauma of a burned camp. Evelyn stared at him, stunned. He was frozen, his hands raised as if to ward off a blow. She did not hesitate. The role reversal was instant, absolute. She saw his weakness, and she covered it. She snatched the torch from the dirt. "I have this," she said, her voice a low, steady command. She shoved the burning brand deep into the oily folds of the heavy canvas. The fire caught instantly, roaring up in a column of greasy, black smoke. "Come on!" She grabbed his arm, pulling him. The heat was intense. "Come on! We are done here!" She dragged him away from the light, back into the rocks. She pulled him into the darkness, her grip on his arm sure and strong. The wagon was an inferno, lighting the canyon walls. A light rain began to fall again, a soft drizzle. It would wipe their tracks clean by morning. As they reached the place where their horses were hidden, Evelyn looked back at the ground. The firelight illuminated the wet mud. She saw his boot prints and her own. They were deep, side by side, pointing away from the fire. A shared path, a promise left in the earth. Unspoken, but undeniable. From the ridge, they looked down. The wagon was a skeleton of fire. Below, near the hidden vent, Sloane's wooden stakes gleamed like bones in the wet darkness. They had won a few hours, perhaps a day, but time was running out. The fire from the burning wagon was a funeral pyre for their small victory. It had bought them hours, nothing more. They rode hard, leaving the false hope of Red Spire behind, pushing back toward the source, toward Chimney Eye Canyon. The land was dark, and Kahoni was silent, his body rigid. The fall he had taken, the fear of the fire, had shaken him more than the bullet. Evelyn rode beside him, the cold, wet air stinging her face. She had taken charge, held the torch, and in doing so, had taken on a new part of his burden. They saw the camp before they heard it. It was not a camp. It was a scar, gouged into the mouth of the sacred canyon. A dozen tents, a large corral, and the thing itself, the heart of the operation, sitting on a fresh-cut timber platform, the steam engine. It was a black, multi-ton beast of iron, its smokestack pointing at the stars like a cannon. Even cold, it smelled of oil and coal, a scent that did not belong in the clean desert night. "We have to stop that pump," Evelyn whispered, her voice taut. "And we need the map," Kahoni added. He had recovered his stillness. He pointed to a larger tent, set apart from the others. A lantern burned inside, casting shadows. The engineer's tent. Sloan will keep it there. They left the horses tied in a deep, rocky arroyo half a mile away, a place Taji, his young scout, had designated as a meeting point. They moved on foot, 2 shadows among many. The camp was loud. Sloan had 50 men there, rough men from the mines and freight yards, all heavily armed. They split up. It was the only way. Evelyn felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She was to go for the tent, for the map. He would go for the machine. "Go," he whispered, and was gone. Evelyn moved like a wraith. The wind was with her, covering the sound of her boots on the gravel. She reached the engineer's tent, her hand on her colt. The flaps were tied. She used her knife to slice the rope and slipped inside. It smelled of canvas and tobacco. A man was asleep on a cot, snoring loudly, on a small, crude drafting table. Weighted down with rocks was a sheaf of papers. She saw blueprints, supply lists, and then, her breath catching, her father's familiar, spidery handwriting, the real map. Sloan had not even bothered to hide it. She folded it quickly, the brittle paper crinkling, and shoved it deep into her shirt. She was backing out of the tent when she heard the shout. A single sharp cry. Not Kahoni, one of Sloan's guards. She froze. Then she heard the sound of a struggle, a grunt, the heavy thud of a fist meeting flesh. She ran toward the sound, toward the massive, dark shape of the pump. She rounded a stack of pipes and saw him. Kahoni was not alone. He was surrounded. 3 of Sloan's men. He had been trying to use a crowbar on the main gear of the pump to shatter the teeth. He fought, a silent, vicious whirlwind of muscle and instinct. He put 2 men on the ground, but the third, coming from behind, slammed the butt of a rifle into his bad shoulder. Kahoni cried out, a raw, breath-tearing sound of agony, and went to one knee. "Stop right there, savage." Evelyn's blood ran cold. That voice. It was Sheriff Pike. He stepped out from behind the steam engine, his shotgun leveled. 2 deputies followed him, grabbing Kahoni, twisting his arms behind him. The metallic final click of handcuffs snapped shut in the night air. It was a trap. Evelyn was still in the shadows. They had not seen her. She had the map. Her horse was 500 yards away. She could run. She could escape. She saw Kahoni's face. He was on his knees, his head bowed, the fight gone from him. He had failed. Then a new figure stepped into the circle of lantern light. He was dressed in a clean town suit, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of polite inquiry. "A commendable effort, Miss Hart. Truly, but I am afraid it is over." Dr. Finch, the town physician, the educated man. Alma's warning was a spike of ice in her gut. He looked at her, his eyes calm, as if diagnosing a simple fever. He had been waiting for her. He had known. Pike grinned, his teeth yellow in the light. "We have got your friend. Girl, come on out. We know you are here." Evelyn's mind raced, a trapped animal seeking any escape. The map. She could not let them get the map. Her mare, the saddle. She backed away, slowly, silently, a single step at a time, deeper into the shadows, toward the arroyo. "We know you have the map. Evelyn," Finch called, his voice reasonable. "Give it to us, and I will speak to Sloan on your behalf. Perhaps he will be lenient." Another step. She was almost at the edge of the camp's light. "She is running!" Pike raised his shotgun. "No," Kahoni said, his voice a low growl. He raised his head, and his eyes found her in the darkness. He had known where she was all along. He gave a single day, sharp shake of his head. "Run!" But she could not leave him. She looked from his face to Pike's, to Finch's. She made her choice. She moved, not toward the arroyo, but in a desperate, frantic scramble toward the small shed where the saddles and teamster gear were stored. She was out of sight for only a second. Pike and Finch yelled, thinking she was escaping. In that 1 second, her hands, slick with sweat, pulled the map from her shirt. She jammed it deep into the leather flap of her own saddle, the one she had carried from her mare, pushing it under the thick wool lining. "Let him go. Pike!" She stepped out into the light, her hands raised, her revolver still in its holster. She was empty-handed. Finch smiled. A wise decision. Barrett Sloane emerged from his tent, pulling on his coat. He was smoking a cigar. He looked irritated, like a man woken from an important sleep. "My dear Evelyn, and the savage." Both caught at once. He blew a cloud of smoke. "This is excellent. It simplifies everything." He walked over to Kahone and looked down at him. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble. You and your people. This land," he gestured to the canyon, "needs progress. It needs water. My mine will bring jobs. It will bring a railroad. It will bring civilization. And you," he said, turning to Evelyn, "you chose the wrong side. You chose to stand with them." He pointed at Kahone. "You are an agitator, Miss Hart, an enemy of progress, and the law will deal with you." He motioned to Pike. "Take him. Lock her in the watchtower. I will deal with them in the morning." They dragged Kahone away, tying him to a wagon wheel in the center of the camp. Finch himself took Evelyn's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "I am disappointed in you, Evelyn," he said, as if to a child. "You had such potential." He shoved her into a small, elevated shed, a watchtower that stood 10 feet off the ground, overlooking the camp entrance. A deputy locked the door from the outside. She was alone. She sank onto the floor, the rough planks biting into her palms. She had failed. She had given herself up, and they still did not have the map. She had hidden it, but it was in Sloane's camp, in a pile of saddles. It was as good as lost. She looked through the small, slatted window. She could see Kahone, slumped against the wagon wheel, a solitary, defeated figure. She saw the guards. She saw the massive, dark pump. Her hand went to her pocket, searching for something, a weapon, a tool. She found only the small, copper-plated mirror she carried, the one her mother had given her. She stared at it. It was useless. Then she saw it, far out, on the dark ridge where they had left their horses. A pinpoint of light, a spark. It vanished. Then it sparked again. "Taji, he was out there." "Waiting." He did not know what had happened. She looked at the lantern hanging on a post just outside her tower. Its light streamed through the window. She held up the mirror, angling it, catching the beam. She flashed it toward the ridge. One long flash, then two short. N, D, E. She did it again. N, D, E. It was a desperate, childish hope. She waited, her heart pounding. The spark on the ridge answered. He had seen her. He understood. She watched, her breath held. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. The camp was settling down. The guards were drinking coffee. Then the world exploded. A deafening boom ripped through the night, coming from the far side of the camp, by the dynamite stores. The ground shook. Men screamed. The entire camp erupted into chaos. A mass of running, shouting figures, all heading toward the smoke. In the confusion, a shadow detached itself from the rocks. Taji, he was young, impossibly fast, a knife in his hand. He sprinted to the wagon wheel, sawing through the ropes that held Kahone. "Go!" Taji hissed. "Get her." He tossed Kahone a knife and ran toward the corral, toward the horses. Kahone was on his feet, the rifle wound forgotten. He ran to the watchtower. The door was solid, the lock heavy. He did not hesitate. He slammed his uninjured shoulder into it. Once, twice. The frame splintered, and the door burst open. Evelyn was standing there, her face pale in the chaotic light. He did not speak. He just reached in, grabbed her, and lifted her clean off her feet. He half carried, half dragged her as he ran, shielding her with his body. They plunged into the darkness of the arroyo just as Tazi arrived, leading their horses. They mounted, Evelyn scrambling onto her mare, the saddle. The map was safe. They were about to ride, to spur the horses into a dead run, when a new set of wagon lanterns cut through the darkness, coming toward the camp. It was Pike, returning from the explosion, his shotgun ready. The wagon stopped, blocking their escape route. "Get 'em out!" Pike yelled. Men began to climb out of the back of the wagon, but they were not deputies. They were Ende, a dozen of them, old men, women, their hands tied, their faces impassive. And at their head, his back straight, his eyes finding cojones in the darkness, was Nalin. Sloane's men had captured them. Evelyn looked at Cohone. His face was a mask of such profound anguish, such utter devastation, that it stopped her breath. She understood. Nalin had not been captured by accident. He had allowed this. He had drawn Sloane's men away from the spring, a sacrificial offering, to buy them time, the time they had just used to get themselves caught. They had escaped, but they had traded their freedom for the lives of his people. The victory was a handful of ash, and the betrayal was complete. But it was not Finch's, it was their own. The journey back to Silver Basin was a march of humiliation. Barrett Sloane, having secured his camp at the canyon, had no further need for subtlety. He rode his horse, flanked by his gunmen. Evelyn and Cohone walked, their hands bound. Behind them, in a heavy freight wagon, were Nalin and the other Enda elders, prisoners of a war that had been declared without their consent. When they reached the town, the sun was high, baking the dust of the main square. It was not a return, it was a parade. Sheriff Pike, his face puffed with self-importance, was waiting. He dragged a heavy oak table from his office and slammed it down in the center of the square. He set a chair behind it. "This is not a jailhouse matter," Pike bellowed to the gathering crowd. "This is a matter of public safety." Men left the saloon, the mercantile, the freight yard. They gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and fear. Evelyn saw May Hart at the edge of the crowd, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She saw Alma, standing straight, her arms crossed, her face a block of pure, cold fury. Sloane dismounted and spoke quietly to Pike. A small, nervous man in a dusty suit was shoved toward the table. "This is Judge Harlan," Pike announced. "A circuit judge, here to dispense territorial justice." Harlan looked like a man whose only circuit was between the saloon and the outhouse. He sat, visibly trembling, as Sloane placed a glass of whiskey by his hand. The trial, if it could be called such, began. It was a spectacle of bad theater. Pike stood and read the charges. Cohone, listed as John Doe Apache, was charged with sabotage, attempted murder, and looting. Evelyn Hart was charged with the murder of one Silas Croft, the thief, and, most damningly, consorting with hostiles against the peace of the territory. A murmur went through the crowd. This was worse than they thought. Sloane's men, led by Cruz and Madden, moved through the onlookers, spreading their poison. "I heard they burned a supply wagon," one whispered. "She helped him," a woman said, pulling her child close. "She led the savage. They are probably planning a raid." The ranchers stood silent, their eyes on Sloane. They needed water as much as anyone, but they feared the mine owner more than they feared the Ende. The local Mexican families, who had worked this land for generations, watched from the alleys, their faces grim. They knew what it was to have land stolen by men with paper and guns. Pike presented his case. He described the shooting at the inn. He painted Evelyn as a cold-blooded killer. He pointed to her flight as absolute proof of her guilt. "And our star witness," Pike said, stepping aside. "Dr. Alistair Finch." Finch stepped forward, his suit clean, his face composed. He looked at Evelyn with an expression of profound pity. "It is a tragedy," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "I have known the Hart family for years, since her father's unfortunate passing. Miss Hart has been unwell, prone to fantasy and melancholy." Evelyn stared at him, the betrayal of physical sickness in her stomach. "She fell under the influence of this man," Finch continued. Gesturing to Kahone, he preyed on her instability. "When I learned she had fled, I assisted Mr. Sloan and Sheriff Pike in tracking her, hoping to bring her back to safety, to medicine. I fear her actions, the violence, are the result of a mind unbalanced." It was brilliant. It was damning. He was not just calling her a killer. He was calling her insane. Judge Harlan nodded gravely, reaching for his whiskey. "Do you have anything to say in your defense, Miss Hart?" he slurred. Evelyn opened her mouth, but another voice cut through the square. "I do." May Hart pushed through the crowd. She was shaking from head to foot, but she walked directly to the table. Pike tried to block her, but she threw a piece of paper down in front of the judge. "If this is a court of justice," she said, her voice thin but piercing, "then look at this. This is a forgery. This is a false debt Barrett Sloan is using to steal my inn. He threatened my daughter. He threatened me." Sloan laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "The poor woman is distraught. Judge, I believe. I have something too," another voice boomed. Widow Alma pushed past the deputies. She was holding a worn, folded letter. She did not give it to the judge. She held it up for the crowd to see. "This is a letter," she shouted, "from Evelyn's father. Written 3 weeks before he died. He gave it to me for safekeeping." She unfolded it. She looked directly at Dr. Finch. "It reads," she began, her voice ringing. "Finch, I know you are selling my findings to Sloan. I trusted you. You are a man without honor. The water in that canyon is not for one man to hoard. I will not be a party to your theft. If you or Sloan approach my family, I will expose you." A cannonball could not have had a greater effect. The crowd went silent. Dr. Finch turned the color of ash. His clean, educated facade cracked open. Sloan's face darkened. This was not part of the plan. Judge Harlan looked at Sloan. "Lost." Evelyn, her hands still tied, stepped forward. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, and it cut through the silence. "I did not murder anyone. She said, I shot a man who broke into my home, a man who Barrett Sloan sent to steal my father's map." She turned, not to the judge, but to the people, the ranchers, the families. "This is not about me. This is about you. He is not just stealing water from the Andy. He is stealing it from Silver Basin. When he dams that canyon, what happens to your wells? What happens to your cattle?" She looked at Sloan, her eyes blazing. "Barrett Sloan wants to own this land, and he is starting with the water. But that water is life. It is life for all of us. And you cannot own the rain. Mr. Sloan, you cannot buy the sky." The speech hung in the hot, still air. The crowd was no longer a mob. It was a collection of individuals, thinking, doubting. A rancher near the front looked at Sloan, his hand on his gun. Sloan saw the shift. He had lost the theater. He nodded, a barely perceptible motion, to Cruz, who was standing on the balcony of the saloon, a rifle in his hands. Cruz raised the weapon. "Look out! The hostile is moving!" It was a lie. Kahone was standing perfectly still. Cruz fired. The shot was not aimed at Kahone. It was aimed at the ground near the Mexican families, sending dust and panic exploding. A woman screamed. The crowd surged, breaking apart, shoving, yelling. It was chaos. In that instant, Kahone moved. He had been working at the cheap iron cuffs, straining the chain link against the corner of the table leg. With a surge of strength, he snapped the link. He disarmed the nearest deputy in a single, fluid motion, shoving the man into Pike. From the roof of the mercantile, a rifle cracked. Tazi. He had followed them. He had been waiting. A second shot, and the rifle in Madden's hand clattered to the ground. The square was a boiling pot of dust and terror. A deputy, scrambling for cover, kicked his dropped revolver. It slid across the dust and stopped at Evelyn's feet. She scooped it up. Her hands were free, her instincts sharp. She saw him. Sheriff Pike. He was fumbling, trying to reload his shotgun, his back to her, exposed. Her mind filled with images, her mother's tears, the silver bird pin, the threat of the noose. It was an easy shot, a just shot. She raised the revolver, her arm steady. She saw his wide, fleshy back. She saw the dust on his hat. She shifted her aim, 2 inches to the left. She fired. The bullet screamed past Pike's ear. It did not hit flesh. It struck the wooden stock of his shotgun. The gun exploded in a cloud of splinters. Pike screamed, a high, thin sound, dropping the ruined weapon, staring at his stinging, empty hands. She had disarmed him. The choice was made, justice, not revenge. Kahone was already at the freight wagon. He smashed the heavy lock with the butt of the deputy's rifle. The doors swung open. "Nailin'," he commanded, his voice sharp. "This way, to the alley." He began herding the elders, pushing them through the chaotic crowd, toward the safety of the narrow passage between the buildings. Barrett Sloan watched his perfect legal maneuver dissolve into a street brawl. He had lost the town. He spun on his heel and grabbed his horse. "Back to the dam." He yelled to Cruz, Finch, and his gunmen. "Forget this rabble. The water is what matters." The small group of men spurred their horses, pushing through the terrified crowd, and galloped out of town, heading back toward Chimney Eye Canyon. The dust began to settle. The screaming faded. Sheriff Pike sat on the ground, his hands bloody from splinters, his power broken, his shotgun in pieces. The puppet judge was gone. The people of Silver Basin stood, breathless, in the wreckage of their square. Evelyn stood in the center of it, the borrowed revolver hanging heavy at her side. Her eyes were not on Pike, or on the retreating cloud of dust from Sloan's horses. She was looking at the town water trough. During the fight, a stray bullet had pierced the side of the large wooden tank that fed it. Water, the town's precious, meager supply, was leaking out. It streamed into the thick, red dust of the square. The water and the dust mixed, forming a dark, sluggish puddle that spread across the ground. The color of rust, the color of old blood. It looked, she thought, like the earth itself was bleeding. The red water bleeding from the town trough was a final, terrible omen. The chaos of the square settled into a stunned, breathless silence, broken only by the drip of the town's dying supply. Barrett Sloan and his men were a cloud of dust on the horizon, riding hard for Chimney Eye Canyon. Kahone was already moving. He grabbed Evelyn's arm, his grip a vice, pulling her from her trance. He knew. Sloan was not retreating. He was advancing. He was going to finish what he started. From the edge of the square, Alma's voice, a gravelly roar, cut through the confusion. She told the people Sloan was not running. He was going to the spring. He was going to steal the water from every one of them. That, more than the gunfire, broke the town's paralysis. A rancher, his face grim, ran for his horse. Then another. This was no longer about a murder charge or an Indian affair. It was about their land, their cattle, their lives. Evelyn, Kahone, and Tazi, who was bleeding from a shallow graze along his ribs, were the first to ride. A small posse of 6 ranchers, their faces hard, followed. It was a race against the machine. They smelled the camp before they saw it. A foul, sulphurous tang of coal smoke that choked the clean desert air. Then they heard it, a monstrous, rhythmic thump, thump, thump that echoed off the canyon walls. It was the sound of a giant, iron heart beating. They crested the ridge and saw it. Sloan had not been idle. The steam engine was alive. A thick column of black smoke poured from its stack, staining the blue sky. The massive piston arm rose and fell, driving the pump. At the sacred pool of Vukmatchim, the water was a churning, muddy vortex. The level was visibly dropping. On the newly exposed banks, Silver-bellied fish, the spring's children, flopped and gasped, suffocating in the mud. The air, already thick with smoke, was now tainted with the smell of rot. Above them, the sky was a black, wheeling circle. Dozens, perhaps 100 vultures, had gathered, drawn by the promise of death. Sloan stood on his crude timber dam, a king on a throne of pine. His gunmen, including Cruz, Madden, and the pale, clean Dr. Finch, were arrayed along the wall, their rifles ready. This was his fortress. Cahone's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He saw the dying fish. He saw the sacred water being violated, and he drew his knife. He would have charged, a single man against 50, a wave against a mountain. Evelyn caught his arm. She held on with all her strength, pulling him back behind the rocks. She told him no, that they could not win that way, that it was a slaughter. Her mind was a white-hot spark. She ran to her mare, which was hidden in the arroyo, and fumbled with the saddle. Her fingers tore at the lining, ripping it open, and she pulled out her father's map, the real one. She sprinted back to Cahone and shoved the brittle paper in front of his face. She pointed, her finger tracing the thin, dotted line that her father had drawn. The line from Red Spire, the supplementary channel, the underground artery. She explained, her voice low and fast, that it led behind the dam. It led to the vent. It led to the back of the machine. Cahone looked at the map, then at her. The fire in his eyes did not die, but it focused. It became a cold, sharp point. He understood. He looked at Taji, who was pressing a rag to his side. He looked at the ranchers, who were waiting, their rifles in their hands. He told Taji to take her. He said he would be the diversion. He would face Sloan. Evelyn shook her head, her voice fierce. She refused. She said he would be the diversion. She had the map. She knew where the vent was. She had the explosives. She showed him the 4 sticks of dynamite she had taken from the supply wagon, the fuse cord wrapped tightly around them. She told him this was her fight. It was her father's knowledge. She would be the one to stop the machine. Cahone stared at her for a long second. He saw no fear in her, only a terrible, crystalline resolve. He nodded once. He gave his rifle to one of the ranchers. He told them to give her cover, but not to fire until she was in position. Evelyn, Taji, and 2 of the ranchers slipped away, vanishing into the rocks, following the path only she now knew. Cahone stepped out from cover. He walked, alone and unarmed, into the open. He did not run. He walked with a steady, deliberate pace onto the dam wall, toward the pounding engine. Sloan saw him and laughed. He held up a hand, telling his men to hold their fire. He wanted this. He wanted to savor this. Sloan stood on the engine platform, the heat of the boiler shimmering around him. He looked down at the lone warrior. He mocked him, his voice easily carrying over the thump of the piston. He asked if this was all Cahone had left, all this effort, all this running, just to come and die at the feet of progress. He told Cahone that the machine was stronger than his spirits, stronger than his sacred water. The machine would always win. Cahone said nothing. His face was stone. He was buying her time, every second a lifetime. He kept walking, moving closer, forcing Sloan to focus on him. Sloan, relishing his complete triumph, stepped down from the platform. He walked until he was only 10 feet from Cahone. He looked him up and down. He said he had heard all about the little camp at Red Spire. He smiled, a thin, cruel expression. He mentioned the rain, the fire, the woman. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a confidential, vicious murmur. He asked what all that looking was for. He asked if Cahone really thought he could have her, that a savage and a town girl could ever be anything. He said the water, just like the woman, was a fantasy, an illusion. He told him to stop looking. Cahone's hand, hidden at his side, tightened into a fist. He held his ground. He waited. Far behind the dam, Evelyn found the vent. The green mossy patch was still there, but the air rising from it was weak, The pump was sucking the life from the stream's very source. 2 guards stood near the main intake pipe, a massive iron tube bolted to the rock face, feeding the steam engine. Evelyn looked at Taji. The young scout was pale, his breathing shallow. He saw her look at the dynamite. He knew what had to be done. He told her to get the charges ready. He would handle the guards. Evelyn started to protest. He was wounded. It was 2 against 1. Taji smiled. A quick, bright flash of teeth. He told her it was a good day. He told her the earth would remember his horse. Before she could grab him, he gave a sharp, piercing cry, a hawk's scream, and leaped from the rocks. He was not trying to be silent. He was trying to be a target. He slammed into the first guard, his knife finding its mark. The second guard spun, firing his rifle. The shot hit Taji square in the chest. He went down, but his diversion had worked. The alarm was raised. Men were shouting, running from the dam. He had bought her 30 seconds. Evelyn did not cry. She did not scream. She ran. She ignored the shouts, the gunfire. She ran to the intake pipe, to the pump housing. She was not trying to blow the dam. She was not trying to cause a flood. She was trying to stop the heart. She jammed the 4 sticks of dynamite against the iron piston housing, where the engine's power was translated into suction. She packed it with mud from the stream bank. Her hands were steady. She lit the fuse. On the dam, Sloan heard the shot from behind. He spun, his face a mask of confusion. Then rage. He realized the trick. He screamed at Cruz to check the pump. At that exact instant, Kahone roared, a sound of pure primal fury, and charged. The explosion was not loud, but it was absolute. A sharp, metallic crack that sounded like a giant bone breaking. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the engine faltered. It gave a wet, metallic cough. It died. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, a new sound, a deep, angry groan from the earth. The water in the spring, no longer being pulled into the pipe, surged backward. The violent backflow hit the crude dam. The water, liberated, smashed through Sloan's line of black wooden stakes, washing them away in a torrent of angry, churning mud. Sloan stood frozen in disbelief. His machine was broken. Kahone was on him. The 2 men crashed into each other, grappling on the slick, narrow wall of the dam. Cruz, his rifle raised, ran toward them. He had followed Sloan from town, loyal to the last. Sloan saw him. He yelled at Cruz, telling him to shoot the savage. Cruz stopped. He stood 10 feet away, his rifle wavering. He looked at Sloan, his face slick with sweat and mud. He looked at the broken pump. He remembered being left in the square, his leader abandoning him to the mob. Cruz said nothing. He slowly, deliberately raised his rifle. He did not aim at Kahone. He aimed it at Barrett Sloan. Sloan's eyes went wide. He understood. He looked at the rifle, at the man he had betrayed, and he stumbled backward, away from Kahone, away from Cruz. His boot heel found only wet mud and empty air at the dam's edge. He fell, his arms pinwheeled. A single, short cry was cut off as he hit the violent, swirling water. The backflow sucked him down, pulling him under. The earth he had tried to bleed had taken him. The remaining gunmen, Madden and Dr. Finch, were frozen. Their leader was gone. Their machine was dead. From the mouth of the canyon, the rest of the town arrived. Alma, Mayhart, the ranchers. They were armed. They had seen the dead fish. They had seen the broken pump. They saw Evelyn, covered in soot and mud, climbing up from behind the machine. They saw Kahone, standing alone on the dam. Sheriff Pike was with them. He had been forced to come. He looked at the armed ranchers. He looked at Alma, who was pointing at him, her face a mask of contempt. He looked at the body of Tazi, which one of the ranchers was now gently lifting. He saw the town, united against him. Slowly, his hands shaking, Pike unbuckled his gun belt. He let it fall into the mud. He raised his empty hands. The law, in Silver Basin, had finally woken up. The silence that fell was profound, broken only by the sound of the spring, slowly, steadily, refilling. Nayland, his bonds cut, walked to the edge of Vukmat Chim. The water was muddy, but it was rising. He held a small, painted gourd, one he had kept hidden. He began to chant, a low, soft song of thanks and of sorrow for the young warrior who had fallen. He tipped the gourd. A thin stream of clear, pure water, saved from the spring's heart, fell from it and into the muddy, roiling pool. A symbolic cleansing, a promise restored. Kahone, his breathing ragged, walked to stand beside the old man. Evelyn, her body aching, her heart a heavy stone of grief and victory, walked to stand on his other side. Together, the warrior and the innkeeper's daughter, the two worlds of Silver Basin, bent down. They looked at their shared reflection, a blurred and broken image, in the slowly clearing, living water. The silence that fell over Chimney Eye Canyon was heavier than the smoke. The monstrous, pounding heart of the steam engine was dead. The only sound was the liberated water, the gurgle of the spring refilling its violated banks, and the distant, grieving cry of the vultures. Evelyn's heart stood caked in mud and soot, the map still clutched in her hand. Her ears rang. Kahone was on the dam, a solitary figure looking down at the swirling water that had claimed Barrett Sloan. The fight was over, but the victory felt raw and bloody. Two of the ranchers, their faces grim, were climbing down the rocks behind the broken machine. They carried a body between them. Evelyn, her breath caught. Taji, he was not dead, but he was close. The front of his shirt was a dark, saturated red. His eyes were closed, his face the color of pale ash. They laid him gently on a patch of clear ground. Evelyn ran to him, her exhaustion forgotten. She fell to her knees, ripping open her saddlebag. She pulled out the small tin box, the clean cloth, the whiskey she kept for wounds. Kahone was there, suddenly at her side, his hand resting on the young scout, his forehead. "He will live," Kahone said. It was not a question. It was a command to the universe. May Hart arrived, breathless, her skirts hitched up, carrying a blanket. Alma was right behind her, her arms full of supplies from her way station wagon. The women of Silver Basin, seeing the wounded, formed a silent brigade. They did not ask questions. They did not see color. They saw need. A temporary station for the wounded was made. Evelyn's hands, which had been so steady lighting the fuse, now trembled. She poured whiskey onto the wound, washing it clean, and Tazi, his body arched in a silent scream. But his eyes did not open. The bullet had gone through, high and clean, but the loss of blood was terrible. Evelyn packed the wound, binding it tight, her movements sure and practiced. She worked beside her mother, the two of them, a silent, efficient team. The justice of the canyon was swift. The justice of the town was slower, but it had finally arrived. Sheriff Pike stood alone, his hands still raised. The ranchers had formed a half circle around him. No one spoke. Harris, the lead rancher, walked up to Pike. He unhooked the set of iron handcuffs from Pike's own belt. Pike watched him, his face a mask of sweat and terror. "You are relieved of duty, Sheriff," Harris said, his voice flat. He spun Pike around and clamped the cuffs on his wrists. The click of the metal was the only sound. "Where is the doctor?" Alma asked, looking around, her eyes sweeping the remaining gunmen. Madden sat on the ground, his hands on his head. Cruz was gone, vanished after his single, decisive act of betrayal, and Dr. Finch was nowhere to be seen. "He ran," one of the deputies said, his voice shaking. "When the shooting started, he ran for his horse." Evelyn stood up, wiping her bloody hands on her trousers. She pulled her father's letter from her pocket, the one Alma had read. "It does not matter. This will follow him. We will send it to the territorial capital. A man without honor. Her father had written. He would have no license, no reputation, no place to hide. The next day, the town felt like a different place. It was quiet. The air of fear was gone, replaced by a sober, exhausted vacuum. The remaining men from Sloane's crew, those without blood on their hands, began the long work of dismantling the broken steam engine. The machine was a relic now, a monument to a dead man, his greed. In the afternoon, they met. It was not a formal council. It was a gathering of survivors. They met in the last lantern. Nalin came, leaning on Kahoni. Harris and the other ranchers sat at a large table. Alma was there. And May Hart sat at the head of her own table, with Evelyn beside her. Nalin spoke, and Kahoni translated. His voice was quiet, without triumph. He spoke of the water. He said the spring was the heart of the land, and it could not belong to one person, or one people. It was a gift, loaned to them by the children not yet born. Harris, the rancher, his face weathered, nodded. He said he had seen his own wells dry up. He had seen the dying fish. He had been a fool, he said, to think Sloane's progress was anything but theft. They took a piece of paper, a sheet from May, her own ledger, and they wrote it down. It was not a legal document, not one that would hold up in a Prescott court. It was a promise. The water of Chimney Eye would be shared. The spring itself would be protected by the ND. The ranchers would draw water downstream, a fair share for their cattle. The town trough would be kept full. It was the first agreement of its kind in the territory, signed not by lawyers, but by neighbors. In the week that followed, Silver Basin changed. The population shrank. The rootless men, the ones who had come only for Sloane's silver, had no reason to stay. Their wages were gone. Their leader was food for coyotes. Every day, a few more wagons rolled out of town, seeking the next boom, the next place to dig. But others stayed. A few of the miners, men with families, looked at the small, fertile plots of land near the creek. They had picks, but they also had shovels. They began to dig irrigation ditches, talking of corn and beans, of a life built on growing, not taking. Evelyn stood at the window of the inn, watching a freight wagon leave. The forged loan was ashes. The inn was hers, free and clear. For the first time in her life, she had no debt. She could sell. She could take May and go to Tucson, live in a real city, wear a dress without a gun belt. She had the freedom she had always dreamed of, but the dream felt hollow. She found herself walking, not toward the road out of town, but toward the hills, toward the canyon. She was at a crossroads, and all paths seemed to lead back to the water. Kahoni found her sitting on the rocks above the town. He had been with his people. Tazi was recovering. The young scout was weak, but his eyes were clear. The cleansing ceremonies at the spring were complete. Kahoni sat near her, not too close. The wounds on his shoulder, the ones she had stitched, were healing. The scars would be deep. "The town is quiet," he said. "It is leaving," she replied. He nodded. "The land is breathing again." He looked at her, his gaze direct, the stillness back in his eyes. "There is a ceremony," he said, "when the first summer rains come. We call it the rain counting. It is a feast, a giving of thanks." He was not looking at her. He was looking at the horizon. "Nalin invites you, and your mother." It was more than an invitation. It was a bridge. She was being invited not as an outsider, but as an ally, as a friend. "I will be there," she said. In the coming weeks, the bridge was built, piece by piece. Evelyn gathered the old primers and slates from the abandoned town schoolhouse. She brought them to the inn camp. She sat with the children, her hands dusty with chalk, teaching them the letters for A and B. In return, Nalin taught her. He walked with her by the spring. He showed her the plants. "This," he said, pointing to a small, gray-green shrub, "is the root for fever. This leaf, when chewed, stops the snake his poison." He gave her the ending names. words that felt round and right in her mouth. She was learning the language of the earth she had lived on her whole life, but had never truly known. One evening, back at the inn, Evelyn and May were cleaning. The bullet hole in the wall was patched. The bloodstains were scrubbed from the floor. Evelyn went outside and, with a crowbar, ripped the old, faded sign from the front of the inn, the one that advertised whiskey. It felt like pulling up a rotten tooth. It was the last piece of her father, his failure, the last ghost of their debt. May came out, holding something. It was a small, beaded amulet, a perfect circle of blue and white, the color of water and sky. "Nalin gave this to me," May said, her voice soft, "for the door, a blessing." Evelyn hung it on the empty space where the old sign had been. It was a new promise. The land healed, the spring water, once cloudy with mud, now ran clear and cold. The fish returned. One afternoon, Evelyn, riding near the red spire, stopped. She looked up. The red-tailed hawks were back, 2 of them, circling on the high, warm currents. That night, she stood outside the inn, breathing the cool air. From the ranches in the valley, she heard the calls of horses, the lowing of cattle. The sounds were peaceful, contented. Later, Kahoni came. The town was asleep. May was asleep. He and Evelyn sat by a small fire in the stable yard, in the neutral ground between her world and his. Out of habit, from the long days on the trail, he had taken the red leather thong, the boundary marker, and placed it on the ground between them. They talked quietly, about Taji, who was now walking, about the new families who were planting corn. The silence that fell between them was no longer awkward or charged with unspoken tension. It was comfortable. He had respected her world. She had respected his. The leather thong on the ground was a symbol of that respect, of the differences that would always be between them. Evelyn looked at her hands, resting on her knees. She remembered how they had trembled when she stitched his wound. She remembered his hand, trembling, as he reached for her cheek in the rain. Kahoni looked at the fire. He looked at her. He reached out his hand, palm up. He did not say anything. It was an offer. She looked at his hand, strong and scarred. She thought of her mother, sleeping inside. She thought of Nalin and the children. Her hand was steady. His was, too. She placed her hand in his. Their fingers laced together. It was not a secret. It was not a truce. It was a promise, held in the warm, open air, in front of her home. The seasons turned. The wound in the land, gouged by Barrett Sloane's greed, began to heal. The scar remained, but new life grew around it. Silver Basin did not die. It changed. It settled. Evelyn Hart did not leave. The freedom she had sought was not in Tucson or Prescott, not in some distant, unknown future. It was here, in the dust and rock she had always known, in the right to defend it. She had found her place, not by running, but by staying. She did not reopen the inn to travelers. The last lantern became a home, a true one, for her and May. But the stable, the place where she had first confronted Kahoni, became her future. With Alma, she opened a forge. The sign they hung read Hart and Alma, Smithy, repairs. They did not shoe many horses. They mended plows. They forged hinges and tools. They fixed the ironwork on the wagons of the new families, the ones who had come to grow things. Evelyn, her arms muscled and strong, her face smudged with soot, found a deep, rhythmic peace in the ring of the hammer on the anvil. She still wore her colt, but her hands were now equally skilled at creating as they were at defending. Kahoni became the guardian of the water. He was not a chief, not a warrior in the old sense. He was something new, a bridge. He worked with the ranchers and the new farmers, teaching them the wisdom Nalin had taught him how to read the land, how to build small, smart ditches that guided the water without stealing it, how to plant in ways that respected the earth. He was the man who spoke for the spring, and for the first time, the people of the town listened. near the sacred spring of Vukmat-Chim, where the water now ran clear and deep. The ranchers and the Ende had raised a small column of red stone. It was not a grave, it was a marker. It bore no name. It bore only a single carving, a red-tailed hawk in full, stooping dive. It was a memorial, not of death, but of sacrifice, a reminder of the battle fought there, and of the price nearly paid. Taji recovered, his chest scarred but his spirit unbroken, would often stop there. He had a small, beaded leather charm, one Evelyn had made, tied to his saddle. It was a reminder of the blood he had shed and of the life he had almost lost. For that ground, he did not forget. No one did. One evening, as the sun turned the high cliffs to gold, the new silver basin gathered. It was not a formal dinner. It was a shared meal in the large, open space behind the inn. Mayhart, her face softer now, wrinkles of laughter replacing the lines of fear, cooked alongside the wives of the Mexican families. Nalin, his eyes clear, sat on a bench, watching. The ND children, their faces bright with curiosity, played a running game with the ranchers' sons. The tables were loaded with cornbread and beans, with venison stew and dried meat. The food was simple, and it was plenty. Harris, the rancher, raised a tin cup of clean water, a toast not to profit, but to survival. And after the meal, a guitar began to play, a soft Spanish tune. One of the Enda elders began a low, rhythmic chant. The songs, one of loss and one of endurance, wove together in the twilight. They were two languages, but they sang one story. This was the new family, the one chosen by fire and water. Later that night, the inn was quiet. May was asleep. Evelyn was in the main room, mending a tear in her work shirt by the light of a single lamp. The new blessing, Nalin his amulet, hung on the doorframe, a small, dark circle. Kahoni entered without knocking. He no longer needed to. He carried the small, red leather thong, the boundary marker he had once placed between them. He had carried it since their night at Red Spire. He held it out to her, a question in his eyes. Evelyn looked at it. She looked at him, his face calm in the lamplight. She smiled, a small, slow smile. She took the leather strip from his hand. She did not put it on the floor between them. She did not toss it in the fire. She walked to the front door and tied it, gently, to the frame, just below Nalin his amulet. It hung there, a small, red line, framing the world outside. She turned back to him. Kahoni's smile was quiet. The new boundary, he said, his voice low, is respect, not distance. He walked to her. He did not hesitate. He lifted his hand, the one that was scarred, and this time he did not stop. His fingers, warm and rough, brushed her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, her promise to the land and her promise to him becoming one. In the town square, the wreckage of the steam engine had been reassembled. The ranchers, using a team of mules, had dragged the massive, broken pieces from the canyon and had bolted them together. It was a skeleton, a rusted, twisted monument of iron. It stood where Pike's desk had been, where the false trial had happened. The children were wary of it. The adults looked at it every day. It was their reminder, their scar, a warning that progress could not be allowed to drink the life of the world dry. The rains came, not as a deluge, but as a soft, steady blessing, the true, counting rain. Kahoni and Evelyn were walking back from the spring when it began. They stopped, turning their faces to the sky. Nalin, his words came back to her, a whisper in the sound of the water. We do not own the water. We only borrow it from our children. Evelyn held out her hand, feeling the cool drops. Kahoni placed his hand over hers. The rain ran over their joined skin, washing away the last of the blood and the soot, sealing their promise. As they stood there, a new sound came from the main road, The rumble of heavy wheels. A new wagon train was cresting the pass, heading into the basin. These were not freight wagons, not Sloane's machines. These were settlers' wagons, their white canvas tops bright against the darkening sky, filled with new families from the east, seeking land, seeking water, seeking a new life. It was a new challenge, a new test for the fragile peace they had built. Evelyn looked at Kahone. He was already watching her. She saw no fear in his eyes. He saw none in hers. They were ready. The narrator's voice was a whisper, as dry and as true as the desert wind. Freedom was not a place. It was not a paper or a piece of land. It was just this, a promise kept, a promise to the earth, and a promise to each other. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love for you to comment with where you are listening from so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And please subscribe to our channel Wild West Tales, like the video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.